The first thing he heard wasn't a cry. It was the sound of water hitting stone. She had collapsed against the edge of the old watering trough, both hands gripping the rough wood like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, stained dark with dried blood and red earth. The Texas sun hammered down without mercy. Even the flies had found her before anyone else did. Elias McCrae, 52 years old, stood a few feet back, watching. His shirt clung to him with sweat. He was not her kin. He was not her keeper. But somehow on a quiet Tuesday morning, this young woman had appeared at the edge of his property, broken and barely breathing, and not a single soul in Moiety seemed willing to ask how she'd gotten there. "Hold on," he said. "Low. Steady." Her arms trembled. Her lips had gone the color of winter sky. The water rippled as her breath came in shallow bursts. She had been found near the fence line at first light. No shoes, no name offered. No one to claim her. Some in town called her a runaway. Others said worse. But when Elias knelt beside her in the dust and lifted her from the ground, something inside him quietly shattered. He had seen drought take cattle. He had seen hunger hollow out good men. He had watched fire consume everything a family had built. None of it had prepared him for eyes that looked that empty. He cupped water in his hands and let it run over her shoulders. The sound was almost gentle, like rain on a tin roof after a long dry season, and then, for the first time, she moved. Her fingers tightened around the wood. Not much, just enough. It was the kind of grip that said the body still wanted to live, even when the mind had given up arguing. The ranch sat silent around them. Wind moved through the grass. No neighbors came running. No one appeared on the road. Elias glanced toward the long, flat stretch of dirt that led back to town. He knew the men who had done this. He had seen them at church. He had watched them shake hands at market. Men whose boots were polished by other people's fear. He pressed a wet cloth gently to her face. She flinched but held still. When her eyes found his, they were full of terror and something else entirely. A question she didn't yet have the strength to ask. She was perhaps 25. A stranger whose name no one in town had bothered to learn. But Elias looked past the bruising, past the exhaustion, and saw something that refused to go quietly. The sun continued its climb. The plains turned gold. The water in the trough ran pink, then clear, then pink again before the morning was through. 3 times a day he would tend to her wounds before the fever finally broke. Before she spoke her name. Before a single act of decency on a dusty ranch would ripple outward and change things neither of them could yet imagine. But in that moment, she was still trembling. Still balanced between this world and whatever waited on the other side. Still deciding whether kindness from a stranger was something real or just another way to get hurt. Elias kept his hands steady even as his chest ached, and the question that hung in the dry air above them was one he couldn't answer yet. Was he pulling her back to life, or was she doing the same for him? By the time the sun had burned past its peak, he had carried her inside. The cabin was small and smelled of cedar and old leather. He laid her on the cot nearest the window, where afternoon light fell warm and unhurried. She drifted in and out, murmuring things he couldn't quite catch. A name, maybe. Or a prayer. He wasn't sure there was much difference. He brought water in a tin cup. She flinched at his approach before accepting it, drinking slowly, like someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be offered something without a price attached. He watched the grime lift from her face in layers. Beneath it, the bruises bloomed dark and wide, but she was breathing. That was enough for now. 3 times a day became his rhythm. Morning to clean her wounds. Afternoon to bring food. Evening to sit by the cot and watch the fever rise and fall like a tide he had no power over. He was no doctor. Just a rancher with calloused hands and a quiet house. But something about the way she slept made him move carefully, the way you move around something fragile that the world has already handled too roughly. On the 4th day, he forgot the midday meal. He came rushing back to find her sitting upright by the window, one hand resting on her stomach, staring out at the empty field with the kind of patience that only comes from suffering. He set the bowl down too fast. The broth scalded his hand. "I'm sorry," he said, catching his breath. She looked at him, and then slowly she smiled. It was small and tired and real. "You came back twice already," she said. "That's more than most ever did." He didn't know what to say to that. So he just sat down and let the silence hold what words couldn't. The horses stamped in the barn. Coyotes had been threading through the hills for 2 nights now. Elias wasn't sure if they smelled blood or something else. Guilt, maybe. Opportunity, he didn't care. He only cared that when she finally opened her eyes fully, really opened them, it caught him off guard. They were green, quiet and sharp at the same time, like new growth after a long winter. "You're safe here," he told her. She looked at him without blinking. Safe never holds, he didn't argue. He handed her more water instead. That evening, he made a thin soup from cornmeal and salt pork. It wasn't much, but when she tasted it, the tightness in her shoulders eased just slightly. It was the first time she'd looked at him without bracing herself. By the second night, she could sit up on her own. The fever was pulling back, but the quiet between them had grown thick. She watched him mend a bridle strap at the table. He pretended not to notice. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked. He set down the leather and thought about it honestly. "Because somebody should have." She turned back to the fire. The flames shifted and cracked. She pulled the blanket tighter and closed her eyes, and Elias believed she was finally sleeping when she spoke again, barely above a breath. "They'll come for me when the moon goes full." He went very still. He looked at her pale face in the firelight for a long moment, listening to the wind push against the walls of the cabin, and for the first time, he realized he didn't know who this woman truly was, or what kind of men were riding toward her in the dark. Weeks passed before she could walk without steadying herself against the wall. Her voice came back in pieces, but the wariness in her eyes never quite left. Even as the bruises faded to yellow and then to nothing, she had told him her name by the end of the first week. Clara. She offered it the way you offer something you're not sure you'll get. Back by the third morning, she was waking before dawn and sitting by the window with a blanket around her shoulders, watching the land go from black to gray to gold. He poured coffee the way he always made it, strong enough to stand on its own. She winced at the first sip and then kept drinking. "You said they'd come," he reminded her. "Who are they?" She kept her eyes on the horizon. Men from Moiti, the kind that decide things for other people. Elias's jaw set like a fence post sunk deep in hard ground. By noon, he had saddled his horse. "Stay inside," he said. "Bar the door." She grabbed his sleeve with both hands, stronger than he expected. "You'll get yourself killed over me," he met her eyes. "Maybe, but I won't let them walk up here like they own the ground." The ride into Moiti was long and dry and entirely too quiet. The streets were stirring when he arrived. Men lounged along the saloon porch, watching him the way crows watch a field after a plow. He found the sheriff near the feed store, arms crossed, already uncomfortable. "Elias," a careful nod. "Heard about the woman." "She's not a stray," Elias said flatly. "She's injured and she has a name," the sheriff exhaled slowly. "Her name's Clara. She belonged to a cattle broker named Roar. Transaction's been recorded, witnessed." Elias's voice dropped to something quiet and final. "You don't record people." The street went still. Heads turned. Even the wind seemed to pause. Roar stepped out from the saloon door, big and slow and certain of himself, wiping liquor from his beard. "Well now, looks like the old rancher decided to grow something besides grass." Elias didn't move for his rifle. He just looked at the man. "You put your hands on a woman and called it commerce," he said. "Come near my land again and you'll learn what it costs." Roar laughed. That particular kind of laugh that's meant to make you feel small. But the hand holding his glass had a slight tremor in it. Later that same night, Roar sent 2 men down from Sweetwater. Doubled the pay. Told them to make it look like the land had just taken her. When Elias turned his horse to leave, the sheriff called after him. "You just lit a fire you don't have the water for." He didn't look back. "Then I suppose I'd better make sure it burns the right things down." Clara was waiting on the porch when he returned, arms folded against her chest, watching the road. When she saw him coming, she let out a breath she must have been holding for hours. He looked worn. Older around the eyes, but he was upright. "They know now," he said. "What did you do?" A faint, tired smile. "I told the truth." In a town that had been built on silence, that was more than enough to make enemies. That night, the wind changed direction. It came rolling down from the canyon, dry and carrying nothing good. Dogs disappeared under porches. Horses stomped and wouldn't settle. Elias felt it before he heard anything. He stepped onto the porch with his rifle, scanning the flat, dark land. Inside, Clara sat close to the dying fire, gripping the edge of her blanket. "They're already on their way," she said. It wasn't a question, he nodded. Roar doesn't sit easy with being embarrassed. He had moved her down to the cellar that afternoon. Now he refilled the lanterns and checked every latch and hinge in the cabin. The moon hung heavy and orange, throwing long shadows across everything. 3 shapes broke from the darkness near the fence. Riders, no lights, no words, just the patient rhythm of hooves on packed dirt. Elias breathed slow and deep. He wasn't a young man anymore, hadn't been for a long time. But he knew this land better than anyone, knew where every shadow fell and where every board creaked. He waited until the riders reached the corral, then he lit the first lantern. One of them cursed. "He's out here!" Elias fired once. Low, just past the horse's ear. A warning with a sharp edge. A second shot cracked from the direction of the barn. Cleaner, more deliberate. That was old Jake, 20 years on this ranch, who had apparently decided tonight was as good a night as any. The horses reared. One rider went sideways out of the saddle, yelling. The others scrambled behind the fence posts. Clara crouched at the top of the cellar stairs, listening. She could hear Elias outside, his voice utterly steady. "Wrong night, boys," they answered with gunfire. Splinters jumped from the porch rail, but Elias had laid this out in advance. Every move he made pulled them further toward the barn, toward the dry hay he'd arranged like a welcome mat. The spark caught fast. Then the roar. A wall of fire shot upward, and suddenly it was bright as midday. The men broke. One limped, 2 ran. The horses scattered across the plain. When it was quiet again, Clara came out. She ran to him, and he was standing at the edge of the firelight with torn knuckles and a rip down the side of his shirt. But he was standing. "You could have died," she said. He looked at the burning barn without much expression. "Not tonight," she turned to him. "What do they do now?" He watched the hills where the riders had vanished. "They'll try again." A pause. "But next time I won't be by myself," she frowned. "What does that mean?" He just looked at her, and there was something settled in his face, like a man who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to explain it. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we ride out to Paladuro Canyon. There's something you need to see." It sounded like a simple thing to say, but what waited for them in that canyon would rearrange everything they thought they understood about the rest of their lives. The sun came up slow over Paladuro, laying color across the canyon walls in long stripes of amber and rust. Elias rode ahead. Clara followed in his old coat, the collar turned up against the morning chill. They stopped on a ridge where the land opened wide below them. The river moved through the canyon floor like hammered silver, winding between walls of red stone that had been standing since before anyone thought to give them a name. Elias climbed down and helped her from the saddle. His hands, as always, were steady. He stood at the edge and looked out at all of it for a long moment before he spoke. "This place brought me back once," he said, "when I had nothing left worth holding on to. I used to ride out here and just sit." Clara moved to stand beside him. Below them, the river caught the light and threw it back. "Why here?" she asked. "Because out here," he said, "no deed of sale means anything. The rock doesn't care who you were before you arrived. Neither does the river." He paused. "Only thing that matters out here is what you choose to do next." She walked closer to the edge. The wind moved through her hair. She breathed in and breathed out, and with each breath something seemed to loosen in her chest. They stayed in the canyon through the summer, 3 times a day, the same as before, but different now. Morning she helped him with the horses. Noon they ate beside the water. Evening they talked or they didn't, and both were fine. She asked about Jake once. What happened to him after the fire? Elias looked toward the distant ridgeline for a moment. "He's keeping watch from somewhere higher up now," he said simply. She didn't press it. One night, sitting close to the fire with stars spread across the whole sky above them, she said quietly, "I was certain I was ruined. That there wasn't enough of me left worth rebuilding." Elias poked at the coals. "Maybe pieces of you were. But broken things still catch the light if you hold them upright. She laughed. He laughed. The real kind, the kind that surprises you and makes you remember that life still has room for it. When autumn arrived, they built a cabin by the river. 4 walls, a fireplace that drew well, and a roof that leaked in heavy rain. But it was solid, and it was entirely their own. No one could come and collect it. No one could take it as payment. It existed outside all of that. Years on, people across that valley would talk about the little ranch by the canyon water. How no woman who arrived frightened was ever turned away. How no one left hungry who had come in honest need. How something about the place felt different from the land around it. Maybe it was just a story people told to explain something they couldn't quite name, or maybe kindness, when it's practiced faithfully, really does change the ground it stands on. If this story stayed with you, ask yourself honestly. When did you last offer something to someone simply because you were able to? Not because they'd earned it or asked for it or would return the favor, and if you had been riding that road the morning Elias found her? Would you have stopped? Or would you have told yourself it wasn't your business and kept going? Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes in quietly 3 times a day until the person receiving it finally believes they deserve it.